What's up, gamers? Dreamcastguy here, talking today about the Resident Evil 3 Remake, because this is a game that still manages to be very controversial. It came out a couple weeks ago, and people pretty much agree that this is a very, very fun game with spooky monsters, great environments, and some really jaw-dropping graphics. But the main problem that a lot of people have, especially the die-hard fans and stuff, is the fact that the game is short. Already people are finishing it in about 120 minutes. And if you're paying $60 for a game, you're probably hoping for more than 2 hours of enjoyment from it. But now that the game has had a chance to come out, be experienced, and people are kind of moving on, instead, there is this new group that's kind of focusing on it. The hackers, modders, people who are actually digging through the code and trying to amplify and improve this experience. And randomly, I've stumbled upon some of their work, and I'm very, very fascinated by it. Now here's the thing, I don't hate the Resident Evil 3 Remake. I actually think it's pretty dang cool, but it wasn't as good as it was intended. I mean, you can tell that this had so much more potential that just unfortunately got cut. Now, obviously, I'm a bit of a fanboy myself. I grew up with the original Resident Evil 3 and played it again and again with my best buddy Nick. It has a huge place in my heart, so the fact that we saw so much stuff just being downscaled was a disappointment. Now, in this video, I want to show you some of the best mods that are, in my opinion, actually making Resident Evil 3 as magnificent as we hoped. This means we're going to be focusing specifically on mods that just make the original game better and not the overhaul stuff. Because let's face it, there are people right now who are remaking Dino Crisis inside the game so we can actually play as Regina and fight off a bunch of weirdly textured dinosaurs. There's some goofy mods that are doing things like replacing every single zombie with Nemesis. And while these are very, very hilarious, I'm more curious about the stuff where hackers themselves are trying to fix the game. They want to make it better, that way those of us who bought it can get more out of it. Now let's talk about the first thing. One of the main aspects that people seem to have trouble with was the costumes. They definitely did some stuff to try and make the characters much more modern, and it didn't quite look right. I mean, the way that Jill Valentine and Carlos Oliveira ended up looking in the final version of the Resident Evil 3 Remake, it's not exactly what we hoped. So modders have already started trying to go in and restore the original costumes. Because remember, Claire is actually in a funny little tube top. I mean, this isn't like revisionist history. Originally, she's in a funny little outfit and a tiny little skirt. Well, a lot of modders right now, who are extremely talented artists, are going in and crafting a new outfit that's kind of a mix of old and new. It's definitely still a more modern take on this outfit, but it looks much closer to the original. I mean, if you're calling this the Resident Evil 3 Remake, we're gonna hope that it looks at least semi-like the original did. Even Carlos has managed to have something that kind of blends together his retro and new styles, making it where all of this now has a much more 90s aesthetic. This game, of course, takes place in 1996, so I like that modders are managing to make the game kind of merge together the best of the old and the new. That to me is awesome. More importantly though, I want to show you the mod that is definitely the most interesting to me, which is just called Investigation. Now this mod is very, very different, and it's something that I don't really think I've ever seen before, but basically inside of Raccoon City, they've put a bunch of different space, lots of different areas for zombies to wander around. There's the tiny pathways that you're walking through to try and find clues and hints and items to try and use and solve that next puzzle. But in actuality, there is hidden parts of the game. A lot of times if you're walking up and you see like a gated fence or something and there's like a parking lot behind it, those parking lots are textured. They're physical space. There's things that they're actually programmed so that you could walk around in them, you could just never access it. Well, a modder has managed to go in there and remove a lot of the barriers in the game, so you can actually run around in a lot of the more open spots. This really dramatically changes the early pace of the game because you have space to see stuff, to wander. Now these are a little bit more barren spots. There isn't a lot of stuff here yet because obviously the developers developers didn't intend for us to go there, but it sort of kind of stokes the imagination of just how big this game could have been if it wasn't made on such a short deadline. Now, what's most interesting about the investigation mod is that this stuff is definitely in the core programming. Like, one of the things that's interesting is that zombies, monsters, and even Nemesis himself understand these areas. If you install more investigation, you can get the Nemesis to chase you in there. He is programmed and has smart enough pathing that he can understand the textures and layers and environments, even though they're not really part of the game. This is cool. It actually shows off the fact that there is this extra layer of the game that I wish we got. It seems like modders are already starting to expand on this as well and putting stuff in there themselves. They're actually trying to make it where this is a fully fleshed out extra part of the game, completely created by the community. And to me, that is a very, very important change. Now, the last two mods we're going to be talking about today are ones that go hand in hand. They're both seemingly trying to approach the same criticism, which is that a lot of gamers were saying that the Resident Evil 3 Remake just isn't scary. Now, it's fun. It's certainly great to blast stuff and get a shotgun and liquidize somebody's skull, but it's not frightening. Despite the fact that they're calling this survival horror, there's not much horror in it. So both of these mods that we're going to be talking about are attempting to address this. Now, the first one, very, very simplistic, but surprisingly effective, is a full-blown first-person mod. So you can play this as a first-person shooter. And you might be saying, okay, but how is that more frightening? It seems like aiming would be a lot easier. Well, yes, being able to pull off headshots and stuff is a lot more fluid, but it also creates a really kind of spooky claustrophobia. It's really nice that you can't see the zombies coming up behind you, but you can hear them. Or if you're in the hospital and you start to hear like a hunter gamma coming up behind you or something, it's cool that you can hear stuff before it shows up. It makes a lot of these encounters that are very, very spacious suddenly feel so much more entrapping. I actually think that this mod is one of those must downloads because it seems like something that could really kind of change the experience for the better, and in a way that I don't think that any of us realized would really work. I mean, when I was playing the game, I never once thought, man, if only I was seeing this through the eyes of Carlos. It's cool that this is so effective. The other one, though, it's much more experimental, and it's a big graphics mod for specifically the lighting itself. Resident Evil 3 is a surprisingly bright game, despite the fact that it takes place in a city that's literally on fire and people are falling off balconies and stuff and splattering on the ground. It's kind of extremely well lit. I mean, there's not a lot of shadowy corners or gooey things that go bump in the night. I mean, it's a game where a lot of times every monster, you can see them from 100 yards away and go, yep, that's him right there. And it kind of makes it where you can't let your imagination run wild. I'm definitely a big fan of horror in general, and there is a philosophy in horror that the best scares are for the things you can't quite see. If you let those things live in your darkness, if you can have your own mind scare you, that is the most effective terror. And the fact that this game is just so bright and so shiny is a little bit detrimental to the spookiness itself. Well, a modder has decided to retinker with the engine itself to make it where the darks are darker and the brights are brighter, making it so like if you're in a area that has like a singular piece of light like a glowing sign, that will be much more apparent, but then the pools of darkness, the shadows and stuff, are going to be much, much darker. You won't be able to just easily pull off a headshot every single time because sometimes there will be people where you can't see their head. In my opinion, this creates a much more authentic dynamic to Raccoon City. It makes it where you feel the fear. So one of the issues I have with Resident Evil 3 is not just the fact that it's short, it's the fact that since it doesn't really feel that dangerous, it makes me wonder how any of these people died in the first place. I mean, if you were in a city that is completely well lit and has giant walking zombies everywhere, how did you even get bit? I mean, these guys are going half a mile an hour. It's not like you didn't see them coming. They're just stumbling at you from across the block. I feel like the darker that Resident Evil 3 is, as long as it's still visible, it creates a more charming sense of creepiness, and I wish that would come back. All these mods are really interesting and they kind of make me excited for what's coming next. I'm glad that people are still working on this. Even now there are some work in progress things like people are tinkering with bringing back the original Nemesis. That way it has the original face and less of like the gooey look we have now. There's so much love and passion around this game from the community and the fan base and of course the Resident Evil people out there that I'm kind of curious to see what comes next. If you haven't bought the game yet and you're waiting for a sale, I actually recommend hold off and get it on PC. I am a hardcore console gamer. I do all my reviews on console and stuff, but for once, I'm thinking about maybe buying an extra copy on the PC just so I can test out a bunch of these mods myself and see how this game really turns out. But these have just been my thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh, so one last thing. I know I already said this in a previous video, but Capcom, don't remake Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4, it's still great. It's still modern. Do Code Veronica. Every time I talk about remakes, I just want to remind you guys, do Code Veronica. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.